Hey, Chris. Morning. There's been a lot of posts on Twitter, on X recently about betting turnover in layman's terms, and you can obviously take it beyond layman's terms, but what are they all about?
Right, yeah. So the Gambling Commission put out some figures on the 28th of November, sort of betting, the latest betting figures that go up to March of this year. And so what I did was I put out a few posts. So this was the first one I put out, which was that. So you can see there the new Gambling Commission figures, and what they said was that slots were up 7% in a year, and horse racing turnover was down 9%. So this was sort of the first post I put out on the subject.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can see on that you can see that horse racing is in the blue, and that's been pretty flat for a number of years, and then it's just suddenly dropped off in the last couple of years.
So just if people are watching this on a phone, they'll be able to see the trend of the graphs. But what's the x-axis? What's the scale there from when to when?
So the first year is 2014-15, and the last year is up to March 2024.
Right, so a decade basically.
Yeah, so it's a decade since. So online, before 2015, most of the online betting was done offshore. So it was only in 2015 the data started to come through for this, when all the bookmakers came back. So that's when the sort of data set here starts.
Yeah.
But yeah, what was noticeable to me was that the red line online slots had this increase last year, and online betting has dropped off.
Yeah. Okay. And so those are percentage terms. So slots up 6% turnover, racing down 9% turnover. What is that in sort of real terms on the actual left and right axis?
So right, yeah. So the left axis is betting turnover. So that's in millions. So it's the betting turnover peaked at around 10 billion.
Yeah.
And is now down to around 8, I think it is.
Yeah.
And the online slots is on the right, and that's up to 80 billion now. So you've got to remember that the margin for online slots is a lot lower, so the turnover is a lot higher.
Right.
It doesn't mean the bookmakers are making, what the profits are slightly different, but in terms of turnover, this is the comparison, and the way the chart starts in 2014-15, they're kind of at the same point, and you can see how early on racing went up faster, and then slots has completely overtaken in recent years.
Even it's not the point of the graph. Just the pure ratio comparison of turnover between the two is staggering to me.
Yeah, it's literally slots shot through racing in 2018, 2019.
Yeah.
And then it been flat and then gone up again.
Interesting. Okay. And so are we going to keep that slide on, or do we want to get back to?
No, we'll just so that was the first slide I put up.
I just want to add a question. I just had a question on that slide though. It was the have they created a monster?
Yeah. Well, this is to do with what it links back to is these affordability checks. So I think we're going to come on to that later on in the conversation. Is that I did a paper about 18 months ago that said that affordability checks are going to adversely affect sports betting and horse racing much more than they are slots.
Yeah.
And there are a number of reasons for that we can talk about later. But it seems that prediction is coming to fold. And then the second chart I put up was, and again, this didn't really attract that much attention either. Now so Gamble Aware, which is the gambling prevention charity, also released data this month. And their data, this is data on the number of people that use, the percentage of types of gambling that people that seek treatment use. So if you look at the yellow line is online slots.
So sorry, and seek treatment, that means they identify as having problematic behaviors in gambling.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, they're seeking treatment for gambling
Okay.
problems.
Okay.
And what this chart says is that the yellow line's online slots. That
Yeah.
means that just over 40% of people that seek treatment have been playing online slots recently.
Well, okay, I've not seen that chart, and that's extraordinary.
So yeah, you can see online sport is
Yeah.
was just over 20%, and that's dropped off
Yeah.
since 2020 down to the latest figures. And
Wow.
online racing, around 10% of people seeking treatment had bet on online racing recently. Now it's down to around 5%.
Okay, so
to me, yeah, sorry, Karen.
Yeah, so my interpretation of that, and I don't think it's not manipulated data. My interpretation of that is that the people that identify as having problems are in the slots arena, whereas the people that are betting on horses and sport, they're getting more and more in control of their behavior.
Or alternatively, more people are betting slots than were betting. So because sport, online horses and online sport has decreased and slots has gone up,
Oh, I
there's
see.
the same number of people with issues, but they've switched what products they use.
Got it. Okay, I missed. Okay, it's percentage of users as opposed to percentage of users within that. Yeah, I get it. Okay.
So less people are betting on horses, less people.
Got it. Yeah.
Will bet on horses. So it's kind of, it's a chart that people will use to say online slots are the devil, but we just don't know whether people prone to gambling problems are more likely to play slots or whether slots encourages problems. I mean, that's sort of a question.
So can I ask a question about that? So that is that this graph would look incredibly like it would, the increase in slots would be even more significant purely based on more people playing slots. So do you have the numbers for within each three of those groups? That could you say that over that 10-year period, the people that bet on horses are reporting an increase or decrease? The people that are betting on sports are reporting. So within each cohort, rather than taking out numbers.
Yeah, you probably could sort of assess turnover against this chart, but it's not something I've done. But I just so the first two charts which I've shown, it didn't really gather much interest online. There were a few comments, and then I think I then put up this chart, this tweet.
We all remember this one. Yeah.
This tweet, because it was on horse racing. Wow. And let's face it, horse racing is pretty much the only group that are complaining about affordability checks. Mm. And horse racing relies on betting to finance the sport. This chart, so this chart is online turnover adjusted for inflation. Mm-hmm. And affordability checks came in around 2000, 2001. They've been sort of stepped up over time. Yeah. And what you can see on this chart is inflation adjusted turnover, and you can see it's dropped 28% or 3.2 billion.
Yeah.
Which is, I think to me it's catastrophic for horse racing to see that decline.
Is the sort of the turning point between, so affordability checks came in after the first two of those columns?
Affordability checks were first mooted in around 2019, right? But they've really stepped up and up and up. So,
yeah,
as bookmakers have been fined more and more, they've become more and more cautious. Yeah, and it's not worth their risk to not make the checks or to take big bets. So the whole industry has changed, and I think we'll go on to the sort of detail with horse racing in a minute, but this is the underlying real figures. When you adjust for inflation, is a huge drop in horse racing turnover. It's an absolute disaster, really. And so yes, that chart was the one that attracted the most attention.
Yeah.
So that the next one, if we just go on to the next one here. So this is online betting turnover. So this is horse racing, football, tennis, everything on all online betting.
Yeah.
And you can see all online betting has dropped. I think it's about 8.6 billion.
Yeah.
So it's not just horse racing that's been affected. Horse racing has been disproportionately affected, but football is down, I think, 26%. And dog racing is down. Everything is down.
Yeah.
It's just that the racing stat gets the attention because that's the one that people are most concerned about, because the sport is financed by betting. Like football, it doesn't matter to the Premier League whether people bet on it or not. It's not really. It's not so much of an issue. So that's the figure for betting in general.
Yeah.
Let me just put the next one up is so this is online casino. So online casino turnover adjusted for inflation, we see that the last year it's just gone up a little bit. So there may have been inflation at 2%. We know that the turnover went up. I think it was 5 or 6%. So it's a small uptick.
Yeah.
But we can see that even online casino is not a growth area. We had this huge increase during COVID, 2020, 2021.
Yeah.
And I think, obviously there was a period where there was no sports betting.
Yeah.
So I guess there was just a huge uptick in slots play.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you can see from that there's no real growth there either.
Interesting. Yeah.
So yeah, these are the charts I put up in recent times, and I think so. The real question for me is, if you go back to this betting one, is this turnover drop has been absolutely huge, and it's like, where's that gone? Well, has it gone anywhere? Have people just stopped playing?
Yeah.
Or has it gone offshore? Or has it gone in? So what's happened is, part of this is that there's higher margins. The bookmakers are taking higher margins. So as they're taking less turnover, they've got higher margins. So they're pushing up their margins on things like horse racing. There's no longer like best odds guaranteed. All sorts of concessions like that have been dropped, which makes horse racing a less attractive product.
Yeah.
So that's been happening. But at the same time, 8 billion in turnover, and high net worth individuals or higher staking gamblers are getting questioned all the time. Can you, bookmakers saying, can you send in the bank statement to prove you can afford to bet?
Yeah.
I don't know if you had any of those sort of things.
Yeah. Loads. I'm going to say a dozen.
And what's your reaction to them?
I mean, previously, I'd say a blanket refusal. I don't want people to know. I mean, it's no. I'll do what it takes to get an account set up, but as soon as it becomes, what do you do for a living? What are your earnings? What are your outgoing? Then I'm just say, no, I'll move on. And I think I'm probably not unique in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just an obvious thing that would happen.
Yeah.
And it's whether you just stop betting completely or whether you seek offshore alternatives. And this was the sort of final chart that I put up, which it's quite a complicated one. So this one is not about turnover. This is about gross scrambling yield, which is what basically the gross profits that the bookmaker makes overall.
Yeah.
So this is for remote and non-remote betting.
Yeah.
So I said earlier that so what's happened is that in 2014-15, all the online bookmakers were basically based offshore in places like Gibraltar, Malta.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what happened is in 2015, a point of consumption tax came in, and to take a bet off a UK residents, you had to have a license in the UK.
Yeah.
So at that point, the revenue came back to the UK, and we had it was all sort of repatriated. So on this chart, we see that 2015, 2016, the gross profit from all betting was kind of what we got here, about 7 billion. I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that stayed stable up until around, after the sort of the 1920 year, that's dropped, and it's remained dropped. So that revenue, my big question is, we know that before the point of consumption tax, that revenue was being made offshore.
Yeah.
The big question is, with the drop in turnover and the drop in revenue now, has that gone back offshore? Like, where's it gone?
Right.
So that's what this chart's saying, is have we literally lost up to several billion pounds in revenue, inflation adjusted, because of the drop in turnover and activity that may or may not be linked to affordability checks, but it seems a big coincidence that this drop off has happened in recent years as the regulation has been stepped up.
Well, I mean, I know you and others have been sounding the alarm on this for years. And so what do you think of the implications going forward, and horse racing, obviously, in particular?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. Probably a couple of years, I've been very concerned about this. People like Carl Berry were talking about this 4 years ago. Barstew's Inquiry podcast, they've been talking about it for years. And it's been in the Racing Post for years, on and off. What tends to happen is something like the news that's just come out of the huge drop in racing turnover, and all the racing press go crazy for a few days, print a load of articles, and then it all goes quiet until the next bit of data comes out, which is quite annoying. But again, it's quite a boring subject to keep going on and on and on about it, when you wonder what can actually really be done. I mean, so for me, it was when I saw the Betfair numbers dropping. So in early, sort of end of 2022, you could just see the numbers just going down week on week. And they've gone from, like, I remember back in 2006, 2007, sometimes it'd be like a maiden race, there'll be £1 million matched on it. Most races way over 500,000.
Yeah.
Now I think it's something like 10% of races over 500,000, maybe even less.
Right.
And it's some races before the off, it's like below 100,000. It's literally just dropped off a cliff, because what I said back then was that this is the tip of the spear. It's like the biggest gamblers bet on Betfair Exchange, and they're going to be the first people to suffer from affordability checks.
Yeah.
And then it's going to filter through to the bookmakers, the places where people may bet less. But Betfair was where the biggest people were. And you had professional gamblers like Alan Potts saying they've been asked for so much information. They keep sending in information, and they just had enough of it. Because it's like you send in a bank statement and they say, well, yeah, but where's this money come from? How can you afford this?
Yeah.
I mean, back in the day, I could just, in my mid-20s, just say, right, I've got 10 grand in my bank. I'm going to put that into Betfair and play.
Yeah.
No chance now. They'd want to know, how you could afford to do that.
Well, I remember you did some brilliant examples, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but completely valid, about if this individual whose net worth is this and wants to have X amount on a horse, versus this individual who's playing at low levels on slots for a different time scale, and how the checks are triggered with someone who objectively can afford it versus someone who potentially can't.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reports that we put out last summer 2023, was comparing how for like horse racing in particular. So say an owner wanted £1,000 on a horse, and the limit of affordability was £1,000 net deposit, let's just say, for example.
Yeah.
If that bet loses, you're immediately triggered. It's immediately triggered that there's a problem.
Yeah.
And then the next day you could have £1,000 bet that wins. So overall, you haven't lost any money. Whereas a slots player could lose £20 every day.
Yeah.
or £10 every day, not be able to afford to feed their family because the money's gone.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't trigger anything.
Yeah.
And that's what, that analysis was crystal clear. And that is one of the reasons why I think we saw earlier where slots have increased, or at least stagnated, whereas betting turnover has just dropped because people don't want to submit this information.
No, understandably. So going forward, like what does it look like? What are the implications?
Well, so we published our report last summer, and what happened was the white paper came out in, I think, April 2023, and they suggested that horse racing would cost about 14 or 15 million a year for horse racing. British Racing then put out a number that's regularly quoted of 50 million a year. Our analysis based on the sort of things we're just talking about and the fact that racing is so reliant on rich gamblers. I think something like 70% of losses come from 1% of people that bet on racing.
Right.
It's about 50 to 100,000 gamblers literally are the key to it, and they finance the sport. And they finance it through media rights, which I think is based on turnover, and the levy, which is based on gross profits. So currently, gross profits have been maintained, so they'll be okay on that front short term. But longer term, I think that the profits and the turnover are going to drop because people are losing all their concessions as the margins go up. I mean, this was our prediction was that it would cost between 147 and 321 million a year. And people, I think that is a huge exaggeration.
Yeah.
But the more the data's coming out, the more I think that we're going to be proved right on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because of the fact that so many of the accounts, of the people that actually bet the big amounts are going to be affected.
Right.
So something like, I think we said 70 to 90% of the gross gambling yield comes from the amount of accounts that are going to, from the accounts that are actually going to get requested for information.
Yeah.
So that's the problem why racing is going to be way more effective. So I think I said earlier, yeah, that football doesn't need, apart from sponsorship, that they get sponsorship money, it doesn't need financing from betting, whereas racing, from media rights, from the levy, needs gambling. So yeah, I think that's the major difference.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of racing leaders come out and criticize, blame the Gambling Commission for a lot of this, all of it, a lot of it, whatever you like. And, so what is the Gambling Commission's role? And also, do you agree with the criticism that's been put against them?
Short answer is yes, I totally agree with it. So the Gambling Commission's role is to ensure fairness in gambling, to keep crime out of gambling, and to protect the vulnerable and children from gambling. What the Gambling Commission seems to have done since 2019 is gone full on for the protect the vulnerable, let's stop gambling harm. But there's no doubt between 2015, when the companies came back from offshore, and 2019, some of them were behaving badly. These, like, you hear of cases where someone on, could lose like deposit £50,000 and lose it in 2 hours and all this sort of thing. And that they got like VIP treatment, free tickets for this, that, and the other. And you could argue that is not acceptable. And I think those sort of cases have been used to push this whole anti-gambling agenda. So this was published in 2020, I think it was.
Okay.
Now, what this chart shows is the health survey, British Health Survey in Great Britain, that every few years has questions on gambling.
Right.
And these are the numbers that were published on the Gambling Commission website of the percentage of the population that suffer from problem gambling. And what you can see is that it's basically pretty flat. Since 2007 to 2018, it's been like 0.8, like nothing really has happened in that rate.
Yeah.
So we've heard all these accusations about, well, let's just look at the chart. And what they're saying here is that this is what the Gambling Commission wrote. If you look at the top, in any event, according to the combined England, Scotland and Wales gambling behaviour in Great Britain 2016 data, there are approximately 340,000 problem gamblers in Great Britain. This is simply unacceptable, as we've repeatedly made clear, needs to be drastically reduced. So that is the philosophy, is that having between, a high of 1.2% down to 0.5% is unacceptable and needs to be reduced. I think the latest health survey in 2022 was 0.4%. So, but the philosophy is this is too high. By international standards, these are not high numbers.
Yeah.
But this is the whole ethos, is that those numbers, that's an unacceptable level of problem gambling. And that seems to be completely driving the Gambling Commission from 2019 onwards. I think they've totally overreacted. So what has happened is operators have improved. You've got things like now where you can set deposit limits. They have pop-ups if you've been playing for a certain number of times.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever play slots, but it used to be that you could bet continuously, just have press a button and have it running like 100 spins in a row.
Right.
Or now it's like you have to press it each time, I think. And they have a timer at the top that says you've been playing for this amount of time, and after an hour, a pop-up comes up, you've played for an hour. So all these sort of things have changed. But what's happened is we've now got to the point where they started asking for affordability, but the Gambling Commission are quite disingenuous about it. So what's happened is that in 2020, they published a load of guidance on disposable income, how to measure it, talked about, you need to know what people earn, whether they can afford to bet. And at that point in time, the bookmakers came out and said, or one bookmaker in particular came out and said, we agree with affordability checks. It's the best way to do this. The Betting and Gaming Council, which is like the group that represents all the big bookmakers, said, yes, we think that asking for bank statements and P45s is a good idea. So they said this as well, because they were reacting to the Gambling Commission, basically having this crusade against any kind of gambling harm. And then gambling reformers came out and wrote a paper saying there should be a £100 limit. So if you want to deposit more than £100 or lose more than £100, I think it was, you should have to have some sort of financial risk check for £100 a month.
Yeah.
So that was what was sort of built out. Around this time, early 2021, the Gambling Commission did a survey of gamblers on whether people would be willing to whether they thought bookmakers should check if people could afford to bet, and whether people would be willing to give the information. Now that survey that was done in 2021, we've only just got the results, came out in summer 2024. Mm-hmm. They've been asked repeatedly at select committees in Parliament and by various other groups, can we have this information, please? We've had all these consultations. We had a white paper which had affordability checks on. This is crucial data to say, right, will the public actually accept, will gamblers actually accept these results? And the Gambling Commission basically hid that survey. When we finally got the results after the white paper had come out, after all the debates were done, after the consultation, we found out that 77% of people said that companies should not be required to do affordability checks, and only 14% said they'd be willing to provide information. So only 14% of gamblers said they would, or people that responded said that they would be willing to do it. So to me, that would have just said, no, we're not doing this. The gamblers are not going to provide the information. Therefore, this is not a good idea. But that information was completely suppressed for years.
Yeah.
And you've got to ask why. Why would you think they'll do that?
So it was a selective sharing of the stats they had.
Yeah. See, they said, oh, it'd be too expensive to do it or something like that. But it took a freedom of information request to actually get it.
Wow. Yeah.
You're paying money to do a survey, and it doesn't take 3 years to get the results.
And so there was a tidal wave of criticism after that. And there's that was 6 months ago. What's been the backlash?
Nothing. But it's just another thing that they've done. And another thing that they did was that, or the comments they made. So they advised the government, and then the government produced the white paper. So the Gambling Commission was supposed to be the experts. They wrote the whole sort of what their advice was before the white paper on affordability checks, such as £1,000 check it if you lose £1,000 or you deposit £1,000 in a day, £2,000 in 90 days. And they claimed that only 3% of people would be affected.
Yeah.
Or accounts would be affected, and 0.3% would actually have to show any information. And they came out with these stats, and those were the exact same things that went in the white paper. So it's completely on the Gambling Commission. They try and turn it around and say, oh, it was the government. We're just acting on what the government want. Well, no, you told the government what the advice was. And the one thing that really is fascinating was that in, I think, February 2023, Andrew Rose, the head of the Gambling Commission, went on Nick Luck's Sunday show, and he was asked, why can't we split casino betting from casino gaming basically, from betting, sports betting, racing betting, because they're two completely different things. Up till FOB-Ts went into betting shops, they were both different licenses. We didn't treat them the same.
Yeah.
When he was asked this, he simply said, because all the data says that more problem gamblers bet on slots, online slots, than say horse racing. So he was asked this, and he said it wouldn't be fair on, or just to paraphrase, it wouldn't be fair on non-harmed gamblers to not have slots on the same platform. You can't split the two, basically.
Wow.
The best question: why would?
Well,
if your whole thing is about stopping harm, why would you say that it's not fair on non-harmed gamblers?
I can watch Netflix and I can choose to watch Prime, and they're different things. I've bet on everything you can bet on in my experience, and the only time I will bet on slots is to make it look like I'm not a very good bettor. That is the only motivation I have to use slots. Yeah,
I mean, so that was interesting that they didn't, because they could advise the government, let's split these things up. They didn't. And then following this, they have, you saw these stats here that I showed you earlier on these gambling harm stats between 1.2 and 0.5% problem gambling rate, very consistent with the Health Survey of Great Britain. And this has been said to be like the gold standard survey. Well, the Gambling Commission have now produced their own survey. So they have their own survey produced, and their survey has come out with a number of 2.5% of the people that they've surveyed are problem gamblers. Completely different survey. You can't compare. It's got different methodologies, different numbers, and there's a reason why. It's because if you do it, if their survey, the Gambling Commission one, they put it out as a gambling survey. Therefore, gamblers are more likely to respond. Therefore, problem gamblers are more likely to respond. Whereas the health survey is a general population survey.
Right.
It was getting a response rate of about over 60%, I think, of people trust. Yeah. Whereas the Gambling Commission's one was 19%.
Yeah.
If you're not interested in gambling, you're really going to do
it makes sense. Right.
So anyway, they produced this figure, 2.5%. Totally can't be compared. But could be useful next year if their particular survey has a 2.5% and next year it's 2%. We can say, right, well, it's gone down. Within that cohort, the type of people that answer their survey, the numbers have gone down. So it'll be useful for that. The problem is that they've released this number as the official number, said you can't compare this number with previous surveys. But what's happened is all the press, well, not all, but like a lot of people in the press, and especially the sort of groups that are gambling reformers, have come out and used this data to say, oh, wow, the problem is 8 times or 6 times bigger than previously thought. This is an absolute epidemic of problem gambling. It's like, no, that's not the case. It's a different methodology, different survey type.
Yeah.
And the Gambling Commission is now firefighting. We've done like freedom of information requests. We can see them writing to like, universities, newspapers, gambling reform groups saying, please make corrections, please make corrections. And they're just, but the point is they put out a survey that they must have known that there was going to be these problems. Mm. I mean, we did this is a comment by an email from Heather Wardle, who is one of the people behind the Gambling Survey of Great Britain, talking about it. She previously said the health survey was the gold standard. And here she says, she talks about the issues, and she says, this suggests that the issues with our study is less the push to web approach and more topic salience, which makes sense, plus a bit of the health survey of England potentially underestimating harm because of the way it is administered. Though by comparison to topic salience, I think this is a more marginal explanation. So she's basically saying it's this topic salience, the idea that gamblers are going to respond more, that is the reason why we have these different numbers, not because of the way the health survey, I think, was in-person interviews.
Right.
And they thought that, oh, maybe problem gamblers wouldn't want to admit it in person, but they're more likely on web. But she's saying that is negligible compared to this topic. So the Gambling Commission are aware there's a problem. They've written in their guidance, don't compare the numbers. But the point is they put this survey out there that has an issue, and they've known that. And then I think the final thing on the Gambling Commission is they're totally focused on harm. So they're not focused on in terms of fairness, where are they when punters are having their accounts restricted? Mm-hmm. There's no minimum bet. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's just, if you win, you're shut down. They're not protecting the fairness in that way, but they're totally into stopping harm. If you looked at their lived experience panels, I mean, I actually applied to go on one that was looking at survey questions related to like assessing the implications of the white paper and affordability checks and so on. And of 8 people, they'd agreed with the DCMS and the Gambling Commission that only one person would not have experience of harm. And I think they said, 2 people have occasionally bet. And it's like, well, you got 8 people and you've got people that have actually experienced the implications of affordability checks and so on, and are knowledgeable on it. Why are you getting 7 people or 6 people, or the vast majority of people who suffered from problem gambling and harm, when we've just seen the numbers, and it's depending on which survey you use, way over 97% of people gamble without harm. So why is it such an imbalance in the panels?
That's crazy. There are so many analogies of how you could apply that to sort of get the echo chamber you want of opinions.
Yeah, and I just don't think they're going to get the answer they want, which is, everything's great, it's all working.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've also seen you be critical of government, bookmakers, the gambling reformers, academics, as well as the Gambling Commission. So why have you been critical of those groups?
But I think ultimately the government hasn't really thought about it at all. They've just gone along with everything that the Gambling Commission has suggested. And also they've been, I think they've gone with it on emotion. So when people that have suffered harm, especially like suicide, relations, taking our own lives, that sort of thing, it's very hard when you're faced with that emotion to not make policy on the back of it.
Sure.
Because it's a bit like during COVID, there's a lot of policy was made on emotion and the fact that people were screaming out for something to be done because people were dying. And I think I think that's happened here as well. There's an imbalance between the vast majority of people that don't suffer from harm and the tiny minority that do. But the tiny minority have this sort of emotional connection, which is and much more motivation to approach government. And I think the government has not looked at it holistically. They've just kind of taken the easy option of, right, let's do something. We've got to be seen to be doing something.
Yeah.
And what they've brought out recently is £100 million a year levy on bookmakers. So it's around 1% of bookmakers' gross gambling yield, which will be used to pay 50 million a year for treatment, 20 million for research, and 30 million for prevention. And the problem is that's all going to go into kind of a central system. And a lot of the charities that have been working for years on voluntary donations for bookmakers and have been doing great work are going to get frozen out. There's already over 100 job losses at these charities that are doing actual work on the ground. So my criticism of the sort of reformers is they're very political, and they approach government. They have meetings with ministers, they have events at Parliament, and they're sort of looking for this centralisation. And they don't mind about, how would you say it, using statistics for their own benefit.
Yeah. So
for a long time, they said if someone was a problem gambler, which is basically a PGSI rated 8+, so you answer a load of 8 questions, and if you answer sometimes to all of them or a lot to a few of them, you're designated as a problem gambler. It doesn't mean you're a gambling addict. But for a long time, some of the reform groups said these people are addicted to gambling. Another thing they would do was, a stat came out that 5% of gamblers contribute 86% of losses. The Pareto principle, that's kind of how a lot of businesses operate. But they use that to say that the gambling industry relies on addiction to operate, which is not true. But they kind of use this information for their own ends. And that's kind of why I'm critical of them, is that it's not a fair fight. They use emotion and they use statistics that, in essence, they've been told not to do, and they carry on doing it. Yeah. In terms of the academic researchers, again, some papers have been written misusing statistics. So there was one out from the university. Well, I can't say they're misusing statistics. There's one, the guidance from the Gambling Commission on the survey we just talked about was you cannot compare the health survey previously with the new Gambling Commission survey. But what I think the University of Bristol did was said the rate is X times higher than it was, or the new research shows it, or something along those lines. And I don't think academics should be, they should know the nuances of how these things operate. And to me, the whole area of academic research is based on, a lot of these people are also activists. And the underlying belief of this sort of public health approach is, if we can reduce the amount of gambling, the total amount of gambling across the board, we will reduce gambling harm. So it's called the total consumption model. So if that's your starting point before you research, is if we can reduce the amount of gambling, we don't see any positives in it, let's just reduce the amount of it, we'll reduce the harm. And if you start from there, I think that's just no, it's unhelpful. It's not, you're kind of biased before you even start. Yeah. A lot of this £20 million goes to that research. That is not going to be good. And to me, I find the research pretty low grade. Having done all my studies in things like machine learning and AI, where everything is, it's hard science, and it's like you read it, you understand it, there's hypotheses, you can test it. Yeah. With this stuff, it's like, well, we do this survey, we do this thing, or we look at a load of papers and we conclude this. It just seems like it's very, I don't know how to put it. It seems quite low grade.
Yeah.
And maybe that will improve with the 20 million funding. But my fear is it will all go to this like public health, total consumption idea. Finally, bookmakers. I mean, my criticism of them is they suggested, they went along with this from the start. They were saying in 2020, let's have the P45, let's have the bank statements. And even now they're saying, oh, well, we want friction, the checks must be frictionless. Well, what does that even mean? I mean, are they saying we're going to use open banking? Are we going to, just because you don't send in a bank statement, people are not going to agree to.
No.
It's not just frictionless. It has to be. They have to be gone in my mind.
Yeah. Right.
So that's my criticism of those four groups.
Yeah. No, that all makes sense. Well, I mean, a lot of people are suggesting that the online casinos and betting should be split. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's a good idea?
In principle, yes. They all were split before. So I think we talked earlier that before, I think I went for a job with Coral back in late 90s, late 90s. And it was just like the National Lottery had come in, I think in 94, and the bookmakers were starting to do numbers games. Do you remember those where you could bet on a certain number of numbers from the Irish lottery coming out? So it was the beginning of like bringing numbers games into bookmakers. And then of course we had FOB teas. And then when gambling taxation changed to being on profits rather than turnover, then roulette became a thing. So it was that 2.7% margin. It became possible, and they kind of sneaked into bookmakers before the legislation changed. And then in 2014, I think the point of consumption tax made online casinos legal and licensable in the UK. So now we're at a point where they've all joined together. They weren't joined together before. You used to have like the Gaming Control Board, I think, and sort of whoever ran betting. But there were two regulators. I think now there's just one, and everything is combined. Personally, I don't like it. I don't like signing up for a bookmaker and being offered free bets, free spins. And to me, some of those things, the free spins are confusing as well. Like, I don't know if you've seen it where, you've got this free spins and you've got this deposit. But you don't know whether you're betting with your own money or the free money. It's just really confusing. And so, to me, I'm not in favour of it. But at the same time, it's here. Andrew Rhodes was asked about it almost 2 years ago, and he said, oh, no, that's off the table. I can't see it ever happening. But I think what is happening is that the anti-gambling groups know that the only thing that is stopping their sort of march to this sort of pushing gambling down is racing. Like, racing is the only group that has protested. It's like gamblers aren't really saying, oh, no, we don't want to. They are saying we don't want affordability checks, but it's not organised. Racing is the only thing standing in the way of all these reforms, because the bookmakers themselves, it's really hard for them to say, oh, we don't want to do this. We shouldn't do that, because they obviously have a financial interest in opposing everything, every regulation. But when racing comes in and says, no, we don't want this regulation, it's a huge lobby. And I think what the reformers are now trying to do is sort of divide and conquer. Oh, you don't want to attach yourself to slots. You don't want to promote slots. Well, of course, we don't want to promote slots in racing or betting. But at the same time, we don't want affordability checks full stop. There shouldn't be affordability checks for slots. There shouldn't be affordability checks for betting. And I think if people get convinced that by throwing casino gambling under the bus, suddenly it's going to make racing all right, it's not going to happen. It's just a ploy. I mean, these same reformers that are talking about that also want dog racing banned. In America, they're talking about saying that sports gambling is bad and micro betting, during the match is bad. So I think it's a ploy to try and get racing to like sort of split off.
Right.
So personally, yeah, I think they should be split, but I don't think they ever will be, and I think it's just been used to, as a ploy.
Okay. So what do you think racing, gamblers and the wider industry can do to get things back on track?
But I think fundamentally we need to get affordability checks stopped. I think it's not a question of them being frictionless or watering it down. We just need the principle of it to be gone. I think there's so many other ways that we can help people that are suffering from gambling harm without affordability checks. I think sort of in this discussion earlier we said the person losing £20 a week or £50 a week, if that is the food money, for the family, or contributing to huge loss for the family, that is worse than a multimillionaire losing £10,000. So affordability checks by themselves are not going to help.
Yeah.
I think some of the tools that have already come out, like deposit limits, all the pop-ups that come up, I think more can be done on that. There could be a data set where all bets are like recorded in the same format, and like tools could be built to like assess that and give more warnings. I know that you've worked on platforms in your past where you can actually assess, are people playing late at night? Are people doing, chasing losses? And you can actually flag that up and tell the consumer, warning.
Yeah.
So those are the sort of things that I would say would help. And I think you've really got to focus on the groups that are already involved in harm prevention, especially. I mean, I saw something Gamble Aware conference last week, but they're talking about children betting on crypto casinos, and it's like, I thought that can't be a thing, but it is a thing. The whole sort of black market is there. So I think you've got to be very careful with the regulation that you don't over-regulate and send people to the black market that has got no protections. I mean, the ideal situation would be that you build the tools here that can warn people, that can help people, and you have the prevention and the treatment in place if people do get badly affected. But at the same time, you've got to keep people in the domestic market. Otherwise, if they do go to the black market in these crypto casinos, where you see these like live streams with these people like have these huge wins, life-changing wins on the slots, and it's all done to like suck people into the offshore casinos, then that sort of thing. We just got to make sure people don't go there and they stay in the regulated market. And I think ultimately what we need to do is challenge the narrative that gambling is bad. I mean, I think there was a YouGov study that came out, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, which showed that people that have suicidal thoughts are actually more likely to not gamble than gamble. So if you're not affected by gambling harm, but you gamble, it's actually a good thing. And I think we need to promote that. We need to promote that things like gambling on horse racing, studying form, probability, all those sort of things that you learn and those disciplines, it's fun and it's educational and it's good. And I think so at Sharp Betting next year, I'd like us to do a lot more educational material on how to gamble and and how it can be a good thing, and you can learn a lot from doing it and about risk.
Yeah, I can agree more. I think it's that narrative word you use. It's like growing up for me. I would gamble with my parents, like as a teenager. It was my mother was a mathematician, my father was a sportsman. Those things combined, and it was a wholesome, fun activity. At Christmas, we might pull out the roulette to have a game of blackjack on Christmas. It's like everything was about understanding probabilities, risk assessment, learn what it's like to back your opinion, maybe be wrong about something and feel a little pang of regret that you didn't calculate properly. I think there were even studies that showed the very just the simple act of placing a bet for young men can boost testosterone, win or lose. If the bet wins, you go further. There were loads of these sort of studies out there. Not to mention the social aspects. Like if I'm in the gym before a big fight or a big football match, everyone's talking about it. Everyone's talking about the odds. Everyone's talking about the analysis of it. Who's going to win? What's the best betting value? And it's a social element. And so the narrative that it's just this doom and gloom problem habit is so at odds with my experience of decades of being around people who like to have a bet.
Yeah, I mean, generally, so I think the Gambling Commission, their numbers came out and said the gamblers were more likely to go to the pub, more likely to go to the cinema. They're more likely to actually be sociable people. And I think that if you go with this idea that we must reduce the total consumption of gambling to reduce harm, it's like saying, to me, it's like saying, well, if we had no cars, we'd have no people injured in car crashes. It's like you've got to look at the positives of the cars, or like in this case, gambling. You can't just look at the negatives.
Let's reduce shark attacks by never going in the sea again.
Yeah, it just doesn't. It's something I think that people in the industry have kind of been scared of. They're like, oh no, because going back to that emotion thing, we can't be seen to be challenging this. And I think that, a lot of the sort of big bookmakers just don't want to do it. And racing is kind of, it seems reluctant to promote gambling on racing. And, if you look at the TV programs, they're reluctant to sort of talk about big bets and people winning now. Whereas back in the day, that was kind of the thing. That was what I watched, like John McCourt talking about this person's had this big winner. So I just think we've got to be more positive in that, and challenge the sort of the gambling reformers' use of data, and the fact that we've got to have a more balanced approach to the research, I think.